Activision is a straight failure of a video games publishing company, and I know when I say that, not really anybody's going to disagree with that statement. I think most people will say, yeah, that's obvious, it's been that way for the last 6 or 8 years, and that's probably true, but I think you may be misunderstanding what I'm saying here. I'm not saying they're a bad company, which they are, and they screw over their consumers all the time, but I'm not really focusing on that because we all understand that is true. But what my main focus is how they're a failure at what they're supposed to be good at and what their company is actually built around, and that's publishing games. They are just really bad at it, to say the very least. But before I can explain exactly what I mean, I want to set a couple examples and explain to you exactly what led everything to this point. And I think the reason why I'm making this video, I mean, it's pretty obvious the reason I'm making this video is because of the recent news between the Activision Bungie split. And I could go into that, and I may go into it later to explain the Call of Duty situation, but for now, let's just understand that, of course, Bungie and Activision, they had a partnership. Neither of them owned each other, they just had a partnership, but one side got sick of that partnership and bought out of the partnership, and now they're on their own, and of course Activision's also on their own. So that's pretty much how that situation went, but I'm not going to go into great detail right now. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because I want to actually tell you guys about a certain report that happened right as this news broke. Once the news broke that Activision and Bungie were splitting up, apparently there were celebrations at the studio Bungie. A lot of people were happy that Activision was no longer a part of anything they were doing over there at Bungie, and they were just pretty thrilled about it, to say the very least. There was apparently clapping, applause, and all that whole thing going on. And I think if there's one way to summarize how Activision treats its studios, I think you could just look at this example. But I want to explain exactly what Activision is doing to their studios, and of course not only their studios but also to their consumers, to kind of screw both of them over at the exact same time. And there's actually some reports that have been around for a while, and it's actually from Kotaku, but they actually got in contact with former and current Blizzard employees, and they told them about their experience working there. Now, one thing you have to understand is that Blizzard is not the same company as Activision. Activision is its own company and Blizzard is its own company, but how it works is that they have the same parent company, Activision Blizzard, and they're two branches, or I guess two separate companies owned by one parent company. But what's recently been happening is that a lot of people from Blizzard, some top people, have been stepping down, retiring, really not for negative reasons, just for more personal reasons and things like that, or other opportunities, and they had just been leaving from Blizzard. And because of that, a lot of the people over there at Activision, at least according to these employees, they have said that a lot of people from Activision have been spreading their influence over to Blizzard. Now, with that said, you have to understand that what these reports are may not be 100% true with what's happening at Activision, but I mean, it seems pretty likely for people who once worked at a beloved publisher of Blizzard and now have been, I guess, experiencing the influence of Activision. And of course, I want to explain what they've been saying. Now, there's a ton of different interviews that Kotaku has actually released from different employees, but I kind of want to summarize everything they've been saying. Pretty much every single one of them have been saying that Activision has been treating Blizzard and really all of their games like they're running out of business or going out of business and they're out of money, which obviously isn't the case because we just saw Black Ops 4 and Overwatch make a ton of money. Black Ops 4 made $500 million in 3 days, so of course we know that's not running out of money, but that's how Activision is treating it. And what that means is that they are cutting spending in every possible way they possibly can. They are telling their studios to cut development time for they don't have to pay the developers as much, use not exactly the best equipment anymore because they can't afford it even though they can, and of course cutting marketing, which is kind of important to certain people, and we may touch on that later, but they're cutting some 3 very important things for all of their games. But at the same time, they're telling the developers to cut all of the spending they possibly can on their game, but at the same time, they're telling them to optimize monetization as much as possible. And I think it's pretty obvious to see how this has all been playing out inside Destiny and inside Call of Duty. Now, I would love to talk about the Destiny perspective because obviously the story mainly focuses on Destiny, at least with the recent news, but since I'm not too into the Destiny situation, I'm going to talk about it from a Call of Duty perspective because the exact same thing has been happening in Call of Duty, especially inside Black Ops 4. So I'm sure you guys saw exactly everything that happened in Black Ops 4, even leading up to it, because you have to remember the three things they are cutting. They are cutting development time, marketing, and just not using the best equipment and stuff like that. So pretty much development time or development, we'll just say development to bunch two into one, and then of course marketing. Now, if you think to Black Ops 4 and the marketing, it was pretty non-existent, which it was really weird to see because if you think back to it, I mean, one thing everybody could agree on is that Call of Duty was really good at hyping people up, but they've lost that ability lately because they just gave up on marketing because Activision are trying to cut spending in every single way, which is, I mean, something that we kind of see, and it's been pretty obvious, especially with a current zombies map that recently released because there was no marketing at all for it. But of course, this is just something that we have been aware of. But then, of course, they've been cutting development time. And I'm sure everyone who's played Black Ops 4, especially zombies, knows exactly the effects of this, because if you guys didn't play Black Ops 4 at launch, at least zombies, you would know that the game was broken. And that is because Activision has been cutting development. They tell them to cut corners at every single place, and that's what they did, thus giving us an unfinished broken game, because they're telling them to cut everything they possibly can and then giving them a release date, an early release date. And they just finished telling them to cut all this development. Okay, that's brilliant by Activision. Okay, that's the reason why we got a broken game from Call of Duty this year and why Black Ops 4 was so broken, because Activision was dead set on them, of course, cutting development and cutting marketing and absolutely everything they can, and then, of course, releasing it by a certain date, thus giving us a pretty broken game on launch. And of course, you could also look at the other situation, because not only are they cutting everything they possibly can, or cutting all spending they possibly can, but they are also trying to optimize, of course, their monetization. And this has been something that's been going on in Call of Duty for a long time, because this is nothing new, because we do know that Call of Duty, it makes one of the mortal sins, and that is charging your consumers in every possible way you can with video games, because you see some video games, they charge you to get in the game, and then of course that's all you have to pay. You see some video games, they charge you for DLCs. You see some games that then will charge you for microtransactions. But Call of Duty says, why can't we do all of them? So they monetize the game in three different ways: by charging for the game, and then they also monetize it by having a DLC system that you have to pay for, and then after that they charge you for the microtransaction system. Three different ways to charge you money, and of course this is obvious because we did hear from the former employees that Activision has been doing things like this, and they are trying to optimize monetization as much as possible. Now, with that said, how does this make Activision a failure as a publishing company? Well, I mean, you have to look at what a publishing company is supposed to do. I mean, if you just do a quick Google search, you would find out that a publishing company has two different jobs. It's to market their game, and then it's supposed to fund their game. Now, what I find ridiculous is that yes, they funded the game, so they did that part, but they funded the game by cutting corners. They were cutting development as much as possible, and then even after cutting development as much as possible and spending about $100 million to develop the game, they made $500 million on that game. So they made $400 million in profits, and they were still unpleased with how that game turned out. Just think about that for a second. They cut the game, making it a broken game. They cut all development as much as possible, and then of course they released a broken game. But the main point is that yes, they did do the funding part, but they did it the worst way possible, and we're still very unpleased with the outcome of it. But then another thing they cut was marketing. And this has been a huge problem with Black Ops 4 specifically, because there was like no hype going into this game. The only decent sort of marketing we've got for Black Ops 4 was the reveal event. After that, we got nothing else. There wasn't a single thing to get you hyped about the game or even interested in the game. It was that was pretty much it. We didn't get a proper trailer at all for this game. It's just really ridiculous to say at the very least. I mean, really, if you look at the trailers they made, they were trailers that honestly almost anybody who knows what Premiere Pro could make. They were actually that easy if you think back to the commercials. And in fact, if you think back to any of the commercials that were made, if they were quality in any way, shape, or form, they were probably made by PlayStation, because PlayStation released a couple Black Ops 4 commercials, and they were of course made by PlayStation, of course mixed with a bunch of other games, and those were probably the best commercials that were ever out for Black Ops 4. So it's just kind of interesting to see that they call themselves a publishing company when they fail at their two jobs. They have two jobs and they can't do either. They cannot market their game. They did not market DLC 1 for Black Ops 4 in the slightest. If you're not a strong, I guess a hardcore player inside Black Ops 4, you wouldn't know that there was a DLC 1 for Black Ops 4. For anybody who is just somebody who peeks in and out of Call of Duty, honestly tell me, were you aware that there was a Black Ops 4 DLC 1 yet? Did you know that? Probably not, because there wasn't a single trailer for it. There was no hype or anything built up to that, and that is on Activision's part. They are the ones that are in charge of marketing, and they failed the game. They failed Black Ops 4, they failed the studio, and they failed their consumers all at one time by failing at their job to do marketing. That is their job, and they failed at it. And that is pretty much what has been going on, and why I strongly feel that Activision is a failure at being a video games publisher company. This is why I strongly feel, because they fail at their two jobs. They have two jobs and they don't do either of them right, and they fail especially at one of them and are very poor at the other. And this is why I strongly feel that Activision suck at their job.